This is Ryan Elliott for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. I'd like to be joined by Believe in Bruce today. Bruce, thank you for joining me. We're going to talk a bit about behind closed doors boxing today. Before we get down to it, how are you?
I'm good. I'm feeling being behind closed doors, so I think this chat is probably due at the appropriate time. Ryan, how are you?
I'm very good, Bruce. We've had a couple of technical issues that were definitely induced from us losing our heads with this whole lockdown thing we got going on. But let's get into it, mate. Boxing behind closed doors, Bruce. We're going to talk about sort of the psychology behind it, how it may affect fighters. First and foremost, initial thoughts. We saw it with the UFC last weekend, the first sort of step of prize fighting behind closed doors. What's your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I think now this may be the most controversial statement in fighting today, all right? Initial thoughts are people need to realise that it can be done, Ryan. It absolutely can be done. So, and I know even from Eddie Hearn, Dana White took some stick about the previous event that he had tried to organise. But the work that I'm doing, like with my global corporate clients at the moment, is actually trying to focus on what it is versus reacting to what it's not. Again, you go onto Facebook, you go onto Twitter, there's all this misinformation, non-factual stuff that's really not helpful. So the fact that actually the UFC did do it, the fact that the UFC successfully done it, gives us light. And remember that Dana White's not doing anything that we as humans haven't done since mankind began. You know, we've always ventured into places, we've always explored, we've got things right and we've got things wrong. The reason why you go onto Bondi Beach in Sydney and say, don't go in the water because there's sharks here, because someone ventured there to explore and we learned from their lesson. That's right, Christopher Columbus. We found America because we're exploring. So Dana White should, and anybody who's trying to explore and push the boundaries of what's possible, shouldn't really be made to be a pariah, because actually it's these type of people who are going to help us to move forward from where we are now. So yeah, it was possible, it is done. And actually, there's a lot of, if we deal with the facts, again, Eddie Hearn put something brilliant on Instagram the other day about, you've got Stacey from Sheffield on Facebook who's become an expert, and she's worked in the fish and chip shop for the past 10 years. And she knows more than these scientific advisors. It's interesting because if we stick to the facts and work with the facts and work with the guidance and allow ourselves to stop making stuff up in our head, people will actually see that there's so much more possible. Because effectively what, Corona, COVID-19 is, it's a hazard. And what I'm working with the businesses with me is actually do a risk assessment on it. Just like asbestos, just like all these other things that could be absolute killers. But the thing is, it is very possible. And when you look at the actual impact on the fight itself, well, just wow. This was almost a unique opportunity for fighters to come into an arena, and also remember to prepare for an arena that didn't have any fans there, that were crowdless, that they didn't have that energy, that sort of bounciness, that chaos that we've come to expect with any type of fight crowd. So for me, it was interesting. But the big point that I took from it is it absolutely proves that it can be done, right.
Now let's talk about how this may affect the fighters, and I'm sure you're keeping a close eye on that UFC event. But just to apply what we saw there to boxing as well. How many different little things are there that can affect a fighter going into a behind closed doors environment? Even when you're in the ring, things you wouldn't otherwise be able to pick up on. I'm sure even things like how your opponent's breathing and being able to pick up on these little things. What are the subtle changes that we're going to see that can make a huge difference psychologically?
Well, I think first of all, what we've got is a thing called, what you mentioned in your messages to me, about this arousal theory. And it's slightly outdated, but it's still something to sort of hang your hat on, right? All right, and when we talk about personality types, it's quite interesting, because I would offer that there's not one personality type that would benefit from this or be negatively impacted by this, rather than parts of their personality. And again, this could be, depending on the day it is, depending on what the fighter's had going on. So there's no real KPI that says this fighter will benefit from it or this fighter will absolutely not benefit from it. But for me, as a fight fan, that's what makes it so intriguing, because we haven't got any data. We haven't got the data on how the fighters are going to perform. You might see fighters who we expect to perform, that the form book gets ripped up, and what we've got is the total opposite of what could happen in that fight. Or we might find that actually although you've got, if we look at introvert versus extrovert, all right, the extrovert, they thrive on the crowd. You're Conor McGregor type person, all right. Now the crowd has always been a constant stressor since, in fact, it's always been there since, since people were gladiators. Since people were gladiators, the crowd has been there. So when you've got an extrovert, they may have learned, or that self-narrative that's going on is that I need the crowd to be the best version of myself. I need the crowd to lift me up. On the other hand, you might have the introverts, the people who don't like speaking in front of public, who don't really like the crowds, or that's the story that they tell themselves. But when we've got no crowd, we might find that the extroverts actually find that they don't need it, but it was the story that they were telling themselves. Or we may even find that the introverts, although they have told themselves since they started fighting that they don't like fighting out with the crowd, they don't like walking out in front of the crowd and the camera. Actually, it may have been a stressor, it may have been a trigger, it may have been that little spike that started their arousal process that actually helped them to get ready for the fight. But for years, they've told themselves that they don't like crowds. And this is interesting because when we look at that arousal theory, it's called the inverted U. All right, inverted U. And if you will, okay, so we're going to picture an inverted U. And the thinking behind it is that we start off as a low-performing individual, and then certain things start to occur that start to peak our performance. And at the top, it's called the eyes off, individual zone of optimized function, all right, just at the top here. And that's the sweet spot. That's when you talk about people being in the zone, Ryan. Yeah, people being in the zone. And again, the crowd will impact this. Absolutely, the crowd could be massive in impacting this. But then what happens is that you sort of get to the top. And if you're too stressed, if you're over-aroused, then your performance starts to go down. All right, so what we want to do with any athletes is find the specific eyes off, that individual zone of optimized function that is their personal sweet spot. And what you had is, say, for example, if I can go back to the previous, or one of the previous UFC fights, you had Conor McGregor versus Cowboy Cerrone. Now, Conor McGregor thrives in that what we call pressurized environment. And often we're talking about how we would feel in that particular environment. If we were Conor McGregor, if we were walking out, just like people were talking about Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. Oh, Tyson Fury will get knocked out. What we're saying is, actually, if it was me, I wouldn't like to fight Deontay Wilder because we haven't got Tyson Fury's mindset. But Cowboy actually, he's given narrative after the fight about the crowd and he just couldn't get up for it. Actually, I say that Cowboy was too up for it. The crowd, the camera, the Conor McGregor effect, all of those stressors, actually, from my experience, has pushed him past that individual zone of optimized function and back down into the part where he felt flat, he wasn't energized. He just couldn't get up for the. Actually, he was too stressed, if that makes sense, Ryan. And that comes from the crowd. So depending on the fighter, depending on the event, depending on the time, what stories they've told themselves. That's why I'm so excited to see how fighters start to react. Because until they go in that situation, it's not like sparring. All right, I've been watching threads on Twitter, and it's not like sparring at all. Because that's sparring, and this is a fight. Therefore, unless you've fought in front of it in a competitive fight, without the crowd, with the cameras there, etc., knowing people are watching, you haven't got the data to truly know how you're going to perform on that occasion.
And I suppose the thing as well, Bruce, even if a lot of fighters, started working their way up on small halls or fighting, not in front of so many people, that's a fight they're expected to win, a fight where they're in a heavy favourite. If we're going to see 50-50 domestic fights, we're going to see title fights behind closed doors. There's even talk of like Dillian White and Alexander Povetkin. Is there any way to mentally prepare yourself for going into a fight of that magnitude where, it could be a toss-up when there's not going to be a crowd there? Is there any way you can prepare for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can prepare for everything. Now, this is the interesting part. A lot of the time, so for example, what I just gave before about Cowboy Cerrone versus Conor, his team had not mentally prepared him. Absolutely. All the evidence is that, yes, go and do the sparring, go and do the push-ups, go and do the running. And this is what you see. And actually, the fight game is probably the vertical of sports that is lagging behind all others. Because there's a fear, there's almost a social fear that, actually, I'm working with a sports psychologist. If you look at Groves and Froch, and that narrative is still there. People are happy to see it. I've got a coach, I've got a pad man, I've got a nutritionist, I've got a strength and conditioning coach. How many people are happy to say, yeah, I'm working with a psychologist to help their mind, but that's where the performance comes from. Thinking, feeling, acting. The performance only comes from if you've got a athlete on that particular, what's called situational efficacy. On the night of the fight, if they perform, they've got their thoughts in check. They are able to utilize those thoughts to generate the feelings to then get the performance. So when we're talking about behind closed doors, domestic fights, whatever it may be, whatever it may be, the fact is you can prepare for this because talking about it, all right, talking about it, again, within boxing and in MMA, it's like, oh, we don't talk about what could happen if we can feel, because then we're accepting. No, you must talk about what happens in what we call critical moments. What happens when you get knocked down? What happens when you're put on your arse? What happens when the crowd's not there? What happens when you feel flat? All this type of stuff you've got to talk about. So when you get to that T-junction, it's not uncommon. You're not lost. You've drilled it and you know which way to turn. You know which way to turn, left or right, because you've been there, you've visualized it. And this is interesting as well. It's not just upon the fight that people will be impacted. It will be the build-up to the fight, Ryan. Because again, part of arousal is that visualization process. And you talk about this, and there is more boxers talking about visualization. I know Charlie Edwards, I think, he does some visualization before he goes into the ring. And I've seen a few examples of it. But let's face it, okay, so a stressor, a trigger. Stressor is not a bad thing. I know stress is associated with bad, but stress is just an adaptation process. The stressor could be that visualization. Hey, Ryan, imagine when we're walking into the ring. The music's going, the crowd chant. Imagine Lewis Ritson coming in Newcastle for the blading races. Yeah, now that there, or any type of impact, that could help spur on a boxer, a fighter in the preparation period, because they're visualizing that reward that comes into it. And when we talk about reward, we talk about the reward center, and this little bad boy here, the brain, the mesolimbic pathway, the area that gets flooded with dopamine and increases our motivation levels. That increases our resilience. We want to do it more. So not having the crowd there could massively impact anyone's preparation, because, hey, well, if there's going to be no crowd there, what's the point? You know, their intensity, their desire, don't get us wrong, they'll train, but do they train to the point where they would be if they know that they're going to walk out in front of the crowd, if that's what rewards them? So absolutely, they can prepare for it, but that involves talking about it, going into the detail of how they're thinking, the feeling, and the acting. And that, for me, is where a lot of fighters, not just boxers, a lot of fighters will let themselves down, because they'll still do the press-ups, they'll still do the running, but the mental part of it, the huge part of it, won't be touched enough. And I think that's where the gaps could be.
It seems like every single fight that's been asked, bar maybe a handful, when asked if they'd fight behind closed doors, said, yeah, 100% I'll fight behind closed doors. It just seems to be the standard go-to answer at the minute. With that said, with all the pressures that come with it, do you still think there will be a lot of fighters that will be happy to just sort of wait this out and put things on hold until the crowds can return?
Yeah, I think, again, if we go back to a model called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's something where you've got to have your fundamentals in place here in order to achieve that next level. So some fighters, again, they only get paid when they fight. I don't know if they get much sponsorship, etc. So they may be forced, like other people in society now, to go back to work because they've got to get that income in to protect their cave, to put food on the table. With cave, I mean house, pay the mortgage, etc. Some of them may just be bored. Like, absolutely, I'm chomping at the bit. And also, you'll find that a lot of boxers, a lot of fighters, a lot of anyone who's driven need goals to be aiming for. I know that's impacted me. I've had to totally rearrange. Okay, what do I want to achieve today? What do I want to achieve in a week? What do I achieve in a month? That was different before this pandemic hit us. Absolutely. So depending on the boxer, their personal situation, you might find that some people are happy to wait. Again, depending on the money available. Will there be, the same amount of money available if they can't sell tickets? All of this type of stuff comes into it, Ryan. So it really would depend on the individual boxers.
Now, when we spoke to Al Siesta, who's a big figurehead in boxing, matchmaker, promoter extraordinaire, Rob spoke to him a while ago, and they were speaking about, when we start to get these broadcaster shows behind closed doors, there will be nowhere to hide for that fight, for the fighters in the ring there. how does that pressure differ of like we spoke about before, not having the background noise and being able to hear your opponent and being able to hear the little side distractions compared to when there's thousands in the arena? How is it more intense in your opinion?
Again, so that would come down to the individual boxer. What are the difference between high-performing athletes and low-performing athletes is the perception that they've got. High-performing athletes will actively seek out situations that success or failure is a 50-50 chance. Low-performing individuals in that particular vertical tend to only seek out situations where they are likely to win, right? Yeah, that's what tends to happen. So when you talk about a boxer having nowhere to hide, like, have they ever got anywhere to hide? Because when they step out of, when everyone steps out of the ring, it's just mano a mano, it's, you versus your opponent. It's not as if you're hiding behind your coach anyway. So I think what would be more specific, what would be more tangible, what would be more focused to say, that without that crowd noise there, what other stressors can impact upon that particular boxer? What else are they hearing? What are their senses feeling? And then how are they perceiving that? That's the key. The absolute perception of what's going on. And again, we talked about someone who believes that they can control everything within their destiny, compared to someone who's learned helplessness, as it's called. They believe that everybody else controls everything, and they are just, they just feel the output of it. And you've got everybody in between that spectrum. So depending on the individual, they will definitely hear and feel and smell different senses going in there. And this is what we talk about, preparing your fighter as best as you possibly can mentally to deal with the factual aspect of that situation. So what happens when you hear their coach saying, he's knackered, go for the kill? Or what happens when you hear this happened on UFC. Some of the fighters said that they could hear Joe Rogan, and what Joe Rogan was saying was impacting them. And this is it, like, I would implore coaches and fighters, a lot of the stuff what I do is to help people go into the detail of what's going to be present in that specific, not in training, all right? I'm not bothered about your sparring, etc. But what I will be focused on, come fight night, go into it with a magnifying glass and granular detail. Look about all the stresses, the triggers, the psychological factors, the physiological factors that are going to be present on that particular night in that environment, and then start, okay, how will that make you feel? How else could it make you feel? How does that look to you? What different ways of that could you look at it? And a label, so for example, labeling is really important. Labeling is a technique that I work with a lot of boxers, athletes, even, corporate education that I do, is that if you are going to say, what will people react to? Say public speaking. All right, a lot of people are scared of public speaking, standing up on a stage and talking to people, walking into a boxing ring with thousands of people there. And what happens is we get physiological responses and also galvanic responses. So galvanic, where the sort of hair stands up on our hands, our heartbeat, we start sweating, all this type of stuff. Now, if you are just about to go into an arena or onto a stage to give a presentation, obviously a lot of the way that I do involves giving big presentations, is that now you can label yourself, I'm anxious. And that one word, that one label, it's a negative label. So you start now this recursive loop. Okay, so I can feel my heart rate, I'm feeling a bit shaky, my mouth's going dry, or I'm anxious. That leads on to, I'm weak. That leads on to, I bet my opponent's up. That leads on to, therefore I must be inferior. Boom, 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 boom. And that's all come from that thought, that mental aspect that you've just delivered. When actually, if you look at the physiological state and also the galvanic responses about when you're excited, let's just say that you in Boxing Social, that you've won the top award at the Boxing Writers Association. I don't know, I'm just making this up as I go, Ryan, but you've won the gold medal and that you're about to go and get it, and everyone in the crowd's going to stand up and give you a round of applause and give you adulation, all right? If you look at the physiological and galvanic responses, they're exactly the same as when you would say you're anxious. Your heart rate will go, your breathing starts to increase, your blood flow goes, the hair stands up, etc. Your mouth may go dry, your palms may go sweaty. But in that instance, you could label yourself excited. Would you agree with that? Yeah, I'm excited to go. And this is what I do. This is what I work with clients. Just the ability to be more aware of your thoughts allows you to choose a different perspective. I call it putting on a different set of glasses. How else could you look at that? Anxious versus excited. These are all the things that fighters and coaches are going to need to know in order to best prepare. Now, you can ignore it. You can say, oh, actually, we'll just concentrate on the sparring and do everything that we've always done. But if you ignore it, as always, there's going to be a huge gap where you may not be in your sweet spot of individualized zone optimized function there because you've gone past it because your thoughts have stressed you out. No fighter or no coach wants his fighter to be on that sort of downwards, the sort of downward angle of performance. It absolutely means that they've got to be in tune with their thoughts and feelings. They've got to be able to control their feelings more. But this is not just for now, this should be in any event. But again, what we see is a lot of people focusing on the physical side, Ryan, whilst the mental side, the most important side, is often forgotten about. But you ask any boxer, any coach, what's the most important side of boxing? It's the mental side. Yeah, if you look at anybody's schedule, it'll probably be 95% structured physical activities with if you're lucky, 5% around something about the mind. But the evidence is there that they need to do more about it.
All right, Bruce, I've kept you for just around 20 minutes, I think. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you're a busy man. And yeah, very interesting stuff. We'll catch you very soon. Appreciate it as always.
Not a problem. Thanks very much, Ryan.